The stagecoach lurched violently as it hit another rut in the dusty Arizona road, and Jane Porter pressed her gloved hand against the window frame to steady herself, watching the barren landscape stretch endlessly under the brutal June sun of 1882. She had been traveling for 3 days straight from St. Louis, her body aching from the constant jostling, her dress stiff with dust, despite her best efforts to keep it clean. The letter in her reticule crinkled as she shifted, the careful script of her Aunt Margaret promising employment as a teacher at the newly established schoolhouse in Superior, Arizona Territory. Jane had memorized every word during the long journey, clinging to the promise of a fresh start far from the painful memories she left behind. The driver's voice rang out suddenly, announcing their approach to the final stop. Jane peered through the window, searching for any sign of the small mining town she had studied on maps. Instead, she saw only scattered ranches dotting the landscape, their wooden fences and corrals standing defiantly against the harsh desert terrain. When the stagecoach finally rolled to a stop, Jane gathered her carpetbag and accepted the driver's assistance in climbing down. The heat hit her immediately, so different from the humid summers she knew back east. She squinted against the bright sunlight, looking around in confusion. "Excuse me, sir," she called to the driver as he began unloading luggage. "Is this Superior?" The grizzled man spat tobacco juice into the dirt. "This here's the crossroads, miss. Superior's another 5 miles east. Your aunt was supposed to send someone to fetch you." Jane's heart sank as she scanned the empty road. No wagon waited for her. No familiar face appeared to greet her. The other passengers had already dispersed, leaving her standing alone with her trunk and carpetbag beside the dusty road. How long until the next stage comes through? She asked, trying to keep the worry from her voice. 3 days, miss. This ain't exactly a busy route. 3 days. Jane fought down rising panic as the driver climbed back onto his perch. She could not stay here at this desolate crossroads with no shelter and limited supplies. In the distance, perhaps a mile south, she could see a ranch house with smoke rising from its chimney. "That ranch there," she pointed. "Would that be the Patterson place? My aunt mentioned they live just outside town." The driver squinted in that direction. "Could be. I don't know all the spreads around here. You might try asking. Good luck to you, miss." Before Jane could ask anything else, he snapped the reins and the stagecoach pulled away, leaving her in a cloud of dust. She watched it disappear down the eastern road, then turned to study the ranch in the distance. She had little choice. The sun would set in a few hours, and spending the night alone out here was unthinkable. Hoisting her carpetbag and hoping someone would later retrieve her trunk, Jane started walking toward the ranch. The heat pressed down on her like a physical weight, and she regretted every layer of her proper traveling costume. Her boots, so sensible in scent. Louis seemed absurd here where the ground radiated heat like a stove. By the time she reached the ranch gate, sweat had soaked through her collar and her legs trembled with exhaustion. The property looked well maintained, with a sturdy 2-story house, a large barn, and several outbuildings. Horses grazed in a nearby corral, and she could hear cattle lowing somewhere beyond the main structures. Jane pushed open the gate and walked up the dusty path to the house. Before she could knock, the front door swung open and a man stepped out onto the porch. He was tall, well over 6 feet, with sun-darkened skin and dark brown hair that curled slightly at his collar. His eyes, a striking shade of hazel green, widened in surprise at the sight of her. He wore dusty work clothes, boots worn smooth with use, and a bandana tied loosely around his neck. Jane guessed he was perhaps 26 or 27, with the lean, muscular build of someone who worked hard every day of his life. "Can I help you, madam?" His voice was deep, cautious, as his gaze swept over her bedraggled appearance. "I hope so," Jane said, trying to sound more confident than she felt. "I am looking for the Patterson Ranch. The stagecoach driver seemed to think it might be this property." The man's expression shifted to something between confusion and amusement. "This is the Crawford Ranch, madam. Patterson's place is about 10 miles northeast of here, closer to town." Jane's composure finally cracked. 10 miles. In this heat, with the sun already beginning its descent toward the horizon. She swayed slightly, and the man was off the porch in an instant, his strong hand gripping her elbow to steady her. "When did you last have water?" he asked, concern replacing the amusement in his voice. "This morning, I think," Jane admitted. "At the last station." He guided her firmly toward the porch. "Come inside before you collapse. Whatever business you have with the Pattersons can wait until you are not about to faint from heat exhaustion." Jane knew she should protest, should maintain proper distance from this stranger, but her body overruled her mind's objections. She let him lead her into the house, where the interior was blissfully cooler than outside. He settled her into a wooden chair at a large kitchen table and quickly poured water from a pitcher into a tin cup. "Drink slowly," he instructed, watching as she obeyed. "Not too much at once, or you will make yourself sick." The water was the most delicious thing Jane had ever tasted. She forced herself to sip rather than gulp, acutely aware of the man watching her with those unusual eyes. Now that she was out of immediate danger, embarrassment flooded through her. "I apologize for the intrusion," she said when she had drained half the cup. "I was told someone would meet me at the crossroads, but no one came. I thought this ranch was much closer to Superior than it apparently is." "You are Jane Porter?" he asked suddenly. "The new school teacher," she blinked in surprise. "Yes, how did you know? Small community. Word travels. Your aunt has been talking about your arrival for weeks." He pulled out another chair and sat across from her. "I am Nathan Crawford. This is my ranch. Well, mine and my father's, though he passed 2 winters ago. Now it is just mine." "I am very sorry for your loss," Jane said automatically, then added, "and I truly am sorry for imposing on your hospitality like this. If you could point me in the right direction, I will trouble you no further." Nathan shook his head firmly. "You are not walking 10 miles in this heat, especially not with the sun already lowering. You will stay here tonight, and I will take you to the Patterson place in the morning." "I could not possibly," Jane protested, though part of her sagged with relief at the offer. "It would not be proper." "Proper went out the window when you were abandoned at that crossroads," Nathan said bluntly. "This is the territory, Miss Porter, not some Eastern parlor. Survival comes before propriety out here. You will sleep in my father's old room upstairs. It has a lock on the door if that makes you feel safer. In the morning, after a good meal and a night's rest, I will take you where you need to go." Jane met his gaze and saw only honest concern, no ulterior motive lurking behind those hazel green eyes. She had learned to read people during her 22 years, a skill sharpened by painful experience, and her instincts told her she could trust this rancher. "Thank you," she said quietly. "You are very kind." "Just neighborly," he corrected, standing. "Let me show you to the room. Then I will go retrieve your trunk from the crossroads before someone makes off with it. There is a wash basin up there and clean linens. Make yourself comfortable." He led her up a narrow staircase to a small but neat bedroom. The furniture was simple but well made, the bed covered with a colorful quilt that showed a woman's touch. "My mother made that," Nathan said, noticing her admiring gaze. "She died when I was 12. Fever took her one winter." "It is beautiful work," Jane said, running her hand over the intricate stitching. Nathan nodded, a shadow passing over his face. I will be back within the hour. Rest if you can." After he left, Jane collapsed onto the bed, her body finally giving in to exhaustion. She knew she should wash up, change into fresh clothes, make herself presentable, but the bed was so comfortable and her eyes so heavy. Just a few minutes, she told herself. Just until he returns. She woke to the smell of cooking meat and the low light of evening filtering through the window. Disoriented, Jane sat up quickly, mortified to realize she had slept for what must have been hours. Her trunk sat against the wall, testimony to Nathan's return. Quickly, she washed her face in the basin, changed into a fresh dress of simple brown cotton, and attempted to tame her honey blonde hair into some semblance of order. When she could delay no longer, she made her way downstairs. Nathan stood at the stove, stirring something in a large pot. He had cleaned up as well, she noticed, his hair damp and his shirt changed to a clean blue one. He turned when he heard her footsteps. "Feeling better?" he asked. "Much better, thank you. I am embarrassed to have fallen asleep like that." "Nothing to be embarrassed about, you were exhausted." He ladled stew into 2 bowls and brought them to the table along with thick slices of bread. "It is not fancy, but it is filling." They ate in comfortable silence for a few minutes. The stew was surprisingly good, rich with beef and vegetables, seasoned with herbs she could not identify. Jane had not realized how hungry she was until the food was in front of her. "This is delicious," she said. "You are a good cook." Nathan smiled, and the expression transformed his serious face. "Out here, you learn to do everything yourself, cannot rely on someone else to take care of you." "Is that why you never married?" Jane asked, then immediately wished she could take the words back. "Forgive me, that was incredibly presumptuous." But Nathan did not seem offended. "No wife would have me," he said lightly. "Too much work to do, not enough time for courting. And the women around here, well, they tend to prefer men with more polish than a rancher covered in cattle dust." "Their loss," Jane said before she could stop herself. Their eyes met across the table and something sparked in the air between them. Nathan looked away first, clearing his throat. "What brought you all the way out here?" he asked. "Seems like a long journey from Missouri." Jane hesitated, old pain tightening her chest. "I needed a fresh start. My parents died last year, cholera, and the man I thought I would marry decided he preferred my cousin's larger dowry instead." "Then he was a fool," Nathan said quietly. "Perhaps. Or perhaps he was simply practical." Jane pushed her stew around with her spoon. "Either way, when my Aunt Margaret wrote offering me the teaching position, I jumped at the chance. There was nothing left for me in St. Louis but memories." "Memories can be heavy burdens," Nathan agreed. "After my father died, this whole place felt haunted by them. Some days I still expect to hear his voice calling from the barn." "How did you manage?" Jane asked. "Running the entire ranch alone." "I hire help during roundup and branding season. And I have good neighbors who assist when needed, as I do for them. It is a hard life, but it is mine. My grandfather started this ranch with nothing but determination and a land grant. My father built it into something profitable. I aim to keep it going, maybe expand the herd if the market stays good." Jane heard the pride in his voice, saw it in the way he sat straighter when he talked about the ranch. This was a man who knew his purpose, who had roots deep in this harsh land. "I admire that," she said honestly. "Having such a clear sense of where you belong." "You will find your place here too," Nathan said. "The community needs a good teacher. These children grow up rough, but they deserve the chance at education." They continued talking long after the meal was finished, conversation flowing easily despite their brief acquaintance. Nathan told her about the ranch, about the challenges of raising cattle in the Arizona desert, about the Apache families who sometimes pass through, and the uneasy peace that existed between them and the white settlers. Jane shared stories of her childhood in St. Louis, her love of reading, her nervousness about teaching children who likely knew more about survival than she ever would. Finally, as the clock on the mantel struck 9, Nathan stood. "You should get some rest. Tomorrow will be another long day." Jane rose as well, suddenly reluctant for the evening to end. "Thank you again, Mr. Crawford, for everything." "Nathan," he corrected. "Out here we do not stand much on formality." "Nathan," she repeated, liking the way his name felt on her tongue, "and you should call me Jane." "Jane," he said, and something in his voice made her heart skip. "Sleep well. I will wake you at dawn." In the bedroom upstairs, Jane changed into her nightgown and slipped between the clean sheets. Despite her earlier nap, exhaustion pulled at her, but her mind refused to settle. She kept replaying the evening, the way Nathan's eyes crinkled when he smiled, the gentleness in his calloused hands when he had steadied her, the easy comfort of their conversation. This was not what she had expected when she stepped off that stagecoach. She had anticipated a brief rest at a strange ranch, nothing more. Instead, she had found herself drawn to a solitary rancher with sad eyes and a kind heart. Dangerous thinking, she told herself firmly. She had come here to build a new life as a teacher, not to lose her head over the first handsome man she encountered. She had learned her lesson about trust, about giving her heart too quickly. Robert had taught her that painful truth when he had broken their engagement without a second thought. But even as she reminded herself to be cautious, she could not quite suppress the flutter of excitement at the thought of seeing Nathan again in the morning. She finally drifted off to sleep as the moon rose over the desert, its silver light streaming through her window. True to his word, Nathan knocked on her door just as the first rays of sunlight painted the sky pink and gold. Jane dressed quickly in a sensible traveling dress of dark blue cotton and joined him downstairs, where he had already prepared breakfast. "You did not have to go to so much trouble," she protested, seeing the table laden with eggs, bacon, and fresh biscuits. "No trouble. I was up anyway. The ranch does not wait for anyone to feel rested." He poured coffee into 2 mugs. "I have the wagon hitched and ready. We can leave as soon as you finish eating." The meal passed too quickly, and soon Jane found herself settled on the wagon seat beside Nathan as they rolled down the dusty road toward Superior. Her trunk was secured in the back, and the morning air was still relatively cool, though she knew that would not last long. "Tell me about the Pattersons," she said as the ranch disappeared behind them. "What should I expect?" Nathan kept his eyes on the road. "George and Martha are good people. They have been in Superior since the silver mine opened 5 years ago. George runs the general store. Martha helps at the church. They have 2 sons, both younger than you. They were excited when they heard Margaret's niece was coming to teach. My aunt has lived here for 3 years, but we have never met in person," Jane explained. "She is my father's older sister. They had a falling out years ago over her marriage. By the time they reconciled through letters, it had been too long. She could not return for the funeral." "That must have been difficult for both of you," Nathan said. "It was, but her letters have been a comfort. She writes beautifully about this place, about the community, about the potential for growth and civilization even in the wilderness." Nathan's mouth quirked. "Civilization might be a strong word for Superior. We have a main street, a few businesses, a church, and a lot of hope. The mine is what keeps it alive. If the silver runs out, the town probably goes with it. You sound skeptical. I am practical. I have seen boom towns come and go. That is why I stick to ranching. People always need beef, whether there is silver in the ground or not." They rode in companionable silence for a while, the wagon wheels crunching over the hard, packed earth. Jane studied the landscape, so alien compared to everything she had known. There was a stark beauty to it, she decided. The way the saguaro cacti stood like sentinels, the distant mountains purple against the bright sky, the endless expanse of space. "You ever feel lonely out here?" she asked. "So isolated from everything?" Nathan considered the question. "Sometimes. Especially in the winter when the work slows down and the nights are long. But I have never been much for crowds. Even when I go into town for supplies, I am always eager to get back to the ranch." "I think I understand that," Jane said. "After my parents died, I could not stand being in that house full of people paying condolence calls. I wanted to escape, to be somewhere new where I was not the object of everyone's pity." "Is that what you are running from?" "Pity. Partly. Also running from the person I was there. That naive girl who believed every promise, who thought love was enough. I want to be someone stronger, someone who can stand on her own." Nathan glanced at her, his expression unreadable. "Seems to me you are already pretty strong. Making this journey alone, willing to start over in a strange place. That takes courage." His words warmed her more than they should have. Before she could respond, the town of Superior came into view. It was smaller than Jane had imagined, a single main street with wooden buildings lining both sides. She could see the general store, a saloon, what looked like a hotel, and several other establishments. People moved about their morning business, and a few children played in the dusty street. Nathan guided the wagon to the general store and helped Jane down. As soon as her feet touched the ground, the store door burst open and a woman rushed out. "You must be Jane," she exclaimed, pulling Jane into an enthusiastic embrace. "We have been so worried. When you did not arrive yesterday, we feared something terrible had happened." "Are you Martha Patterson?" Jane asked when the woman finally released her. "I am, dear, and you must be exhausted." "Oh, Nathan Crawford, thank goodness you found her. Where was she?" "At the crossroads," Nathan explained. "No one came to meet her and she started walking. She ended up at my place by mistake." Martha's eyes widened. "Oh dear. Your aunt is going to feel terrible. She arranged for someone to fetch you, but apparently there was some miscommunication." "Come inside. Come inside. Let me get you some tea and you can tell me everything." Jane found herself swept into the store, which was packed with goods from floor to ceiling. Martha settled her in a chair behind the counter and bustled about making tea while Jane answered questions about her journey through it all. Jane was aware of Nathan standing quietly near the door, hat in hand. When their eyes met, he gave her a small smile that made her heart flutter. "I should be going," he said finally. "Got work waiting back at the ranch." "Wait," Jane said, standing quickly. She crossed to him, suddenly desperate for him not to leave. "I never properly thanked you. You may well have saved my life yesterday." "You would have been fine," he said, but his eyes were warm. "You are tougher than you think." "Perhaps, but I am still grateful." She hesitated, then added quietly, "Will I see you again?" "Superior is not that big," Nathan said. "I come to town for supplies every few weeks. And Martha hosts a church social once a month. I make it to those sometimes." "Sometimes," Martha called from behind the counter. "You have not attended one in 6 months, Nathan Crawford. But perhaps with a certain new schoolteacher in town, you will be more motivated to participate in community events." Nathan's ears reddened. "I will think about it. Jane, it was a pleasure meeting you. Good luck with the teaching." He settled his hat on his head and walked out before Jane could say anything else. She watched through the window as he climbed onto the wagon and drove away, an unexpected ache in her chest. "That one is a good man," Martha said, coming to stand beside her. "Shame he is so set on staying out at that ranch alone. He needs a wife, someone to share the load and brighten those dark spaces." "I am sure he will find someone when he is ready," Jane said, trying to sound casual. Martha gave her a knowing look but mercifully changed the subject. "Now, let me tell you about the school and the children you will be teaching. We have 12 students ranging from 6 to 14 years old. Most can barely read, I am afraid. The last teacher left after only 3 months, said it was too rough for her." "I will not leave," Jane said firmly. "I came here to make a new life, and that is exactly what I intend to do." "Good." Martha patted her hand. "I think you are going to fit in just fine. Now, your aunt should be here any moment. She went to check with the stage office to see if they had any information about your delay. She has been beside herself with worry." As if summoned by Martha's words, the door opened, and a woman who could only be Aunt Margaret rushed in. She was tall like Jane's father had been, with the same light brown hair though hers was streaked with silver. Her face, lined with worry, broke into relief when she saw Jane. "Thank God," she breathed, crossing the room to pull Jane into a fierce hug. "I have been imagining every terrible possibility. When Martha said Nathan found you, I nearly collapsed with relief." "I am fine, Aunt Margaret," Jane assured her. "Just a misunderstanding about where to meet. That fool deputy I sent was supposed to wait for you. Apparently he decided his card game was more important." Margaret's face flushed with anger. "I gave him quite a piece of my mind, I assure you." Over more tea, Jane recounted her arrival and overnight stay at the Crawford ranch, carefully editing out how comfortable she had felt there, how much she had enjoyed Nathan's company. But Margaret was no fool, and Jane caught her exchanging meaningful glances with Martha. Finally, Margaret stood. "Come, dear. Let me show you to your new home. It is not much, just a small house behind the schoolhouse, but it is yours for as long as you teach here." Jane said her goodbyes to Martha and followed her aunt down the dusty street. The schoolhouse was a simple wooden structure with a bell tower, and the teacher's residence behind it was even simpler, just 2 rooms and a small kitchen area. But it was clean and furnished with the basics, and Jane felt a surge of satisfaction. This was hers. Her own space, her own life, her own chance to prove herself. "It is perfect," she told her aunt. Margaret smiled. "I am so glad you are here, Jane. I know the circumstances that brought you are painful, but I truly believe this is where you are meant to be." Over the next few days, Jane threw herself into preparing for her new role. She organized the schoolhouse, reviewed the limited textbooks available, and met the families whose children would be in her care. The community welcomed her warmly, though she sensed some reservations. She was young, unmarried, and completely inexperienced with the harsh realities of frontier life, but she was determined to prove herself. When school began the following Monday, she faced her 12 students with confidence she did not quite feel. They ranged from little Tommy Harrison, barely 6 years old, to Sarah Chen, daughter of a Chinese miner, who at 14 was nearly Jane's own height. The first week was challenging. Several of the older boys tested her authority, and one girl burst into tears when Jane corrected her reading. But gradually, a routine established itself. Jane discovered she had a knack for making lessons interesting, turning arithmetic into games and reading into adventures. By the end of the second week, even the most resistant students were participating eagerly. Jane felt a satisfaction she had never known before. This was meaningful work, something that mattered. But in the quiet evenings, alone in her small house, her thoughts invariably drifted to Nathan Crawford. She had not seen him since that morning when he had brought her to town. She found herself watching for his wagon whenever she heard hooves on the main street, disappointed each time it was someone else. Martha had invited her to Sunday services at the small church, and Jane attended faithfully, partly from genuine faith and partly from the hope that Nathan might appear. But the pew where Martha said he sometimes sat remained conspicuously empty. Nearly a month after her arrival, Jane was walking back from the general store with supplies when a familiar voice called her name. She turned to see Nathan climbing down from his wagon, and her heart leaped foolishly. "Nathan, what brings you to town?" Needed fence wire and other supplies. He approached her, looking pleased to see her. "How are you settling in? I heard the school is going well." "It is. The children are wonderful, so eager to learn despite their circumstances." Jane smiled up at him. "I love it more than I thought possible. I am glad." He reached for the heavy bag she carried. "Let me help you with that." They walked together down the street, and Jane felt acutely conscious of the curious looks from townspeople. News traveled fast in a small community, and she knew their arrival together at the Pattersons would fuel gossip. "I have been meaning to come check on you," Nathan said, "but the ranch has been demanding. Had some trouble with rustlers trying to make off with cattle, and then a fence line went down in a storm." "You do not owe me any explanations," Jane said quickly, though her heart sang that he had been thinking of her. "Maybe not, but I wanted you to know I did not forget about you." They reached her small house too quickly. Nathan set the bag inside her door, then hesitated on the threshold. "There is a church social this Saturday," he said, not quite meeting her eyes. "Martha Patterson hosts them monthly. I was thinking I might actually attend this one." "If you were planning to go, that is." Jane's breath caught. "I was not aware of it, but yes, I would very much like to attend." "Good." Nathan finally looked at her directly, and the intensity in his hazel green eyes made her pulse race. "Then I will see you there." He tipped his hat and left before Jane could respond. She stood in her doorway, watching him walk back to his wagon, a smile spreading across her face. Saturday could not come fast enough. The next few days dragged by despite Jane's busy schedule. She taught her lessons, graded slates, and prepared materials for the following week. But her mind kept wandering to the upcoming social. On Saturday morning, she gave in to vanity and spent extra time arranging her hair and choosing her best dress, a soft green cotton that brought out the blue in her eyes. Martha had offered to walk with her to the social, which was being held in the church's large meeting hall. When Jane arrived, the room was already filled with people. Tables laden with food lined one wall, and someone was playing a fiddle in the corner. Jane scanned the crowd nervously, searching for Nathan. He was not there yet, and disappointment stabbed through her. What if he changed his mind? What if he had only been being polite? But then the door opened and Nathan walked in, and Jane's breath caught. He had clearly made an effort, his dark hair neatly combed, wearing clean trousers and a white shirt that emphasized his broad shoulders. His eyes found her immediately across the room, and he smiled. He crossed directly to her, ignoring several people who tried to catch his attention. "Jane, you look beautiful." "Thank you," she managed, blushing. "You clean up rather well yourself." Martha appeared at her elbow, beaming. "Nathan Crawford, what a pleasant surprise. I believe this is the first social you have attended since your father passed." "Seemed like time," Nathan said simply, his gaze still on Jane. The evening passed in a blur of conversation, food, and laughter. Nathan stayed close to Jane's side, introducing her to people she had not yet met, explaining relationships and history that helped her understand the community better. She was touched by his thoughtfulness, the way he made sure she never felt out of place. When the fiddle player struck up a lively tune and couples began to dance, Nathan offered his hand. "Would you dance with me?" Jane had not danced since before her parents died, but she placed her hand in his without hesitation. He led her onto the floor, one hand at her waist, the other holding hers gently. He was a better dancer than she expected, moving with the easy confidence of someone comfortable in his own body. "You are full of surprises," she said as he guided her through a turn. "My mother insisted I learn." said no son of hers would grow up unable to dance properly. A shadow crossed his face. She did not live to see me put the lessons to much use. She would be proud of you, Jane said softly. The man you have become, how you have honored what your family built. Nathan's hand tightened slightly at her waist. You hardly know me. I know enough. You are kind, hardworking, and honorable. Those are the things that matter. They danced in silence for a moment, and Jane was intensely aware of how perfectly she fit against him, how right it felt to be in his arms. When the song ended, he did not immediately release her. Jane, he said quietly, I should tell you something. What is it? Before he could answer, a commotion at the door interrupted them. A young man Jane recognized as one of the deputy sheriffs burst into the room, his face flushed. Nathan Crawford, there is trouble at your ranch. Your hired hand rode in saying there is a fire in the south pasture. Nathan went rigid. How bad? He did not know, just that it was spreading fast. You need to get back there now. Nathan's jaw clenched. He looked at Jane with genuine regret. I have to go. Of course you do, she said immediately. Go, be careful. He squeezed her hand once hard, then released her and strode toward the door. Jane watched him go, worry gnawing at her stomach. Grass fires were deadly serious in this dry climate. The ranch, the cattle, even Nathan himself could be in danger. Martha appeared beside her. Try not to worry too much. Nathan knows what he is doing. That ranch has survived worse. But Jane could not shake her anxiety. The social continued around her, but she could not focus on conversations or food. Finally, she made her excuses and walked back to her small house, where she paced restlessly. She barely slept that night, starting at every sound, half expecting news of disaster. When morning came with no word, she dressed for church with hands that trembled slightly. The whole congregation seemed to be holding its breath, waiting for news of the Crawford ranch. But Nathan did not appear for the service, and no one had any information beyond what the deputy had reported the night before. After church, Jane could stand it no longer. She found Martha and asked, Is there someone who could take me out to the Crawford ranch? I need to know if he is all right. Martha studied her face for a long moment. You care for him. It was not a question, but Jane answered anyway. Yes. I know it is foolish after such a short acquaintance, but yes, I do. It is not foolish at all. Sometimes you just know. Martha patted her hand. Let me see what I can arrange. An hour later, Jane found herself in a buggy driven by George Patterson, Martha's husband, heading out toward the Crawford ranch. George was a quiet man, content to let Jane sit with her thoughts during the long drive. As they approached the ranch, Jane could smell smoke on the air, acrid and sharp. Her stomach clenched with fear. But as the buildings came into view, she sagged with relief. The house and barn still stood, apparently undamaged. George pulled the buggy to a stop in the yard, and Jane climbed down quickly. Nathan emerged from the barn, his face and clothes covered in soot, exhaustion evident in every line of his body. When he saw Jane, surprise flickered across his features. Jane, what are you doing here? I had to know if you were all right, she said, approaching him. No one had any news, and I was so worried. Something softened in Nathan's expression. I am fine. Tired, but fine. We managed to contain the fire before it reached the buildings. Lost about 20 acres of grazing land and had to move the herd to the north pasture, but it could have been much worse. Thank God, Jane breathed. What caused it? Nathan's jaw tightened. Not what. Who found evidence that it was set deliberately. Same rustlers who have been causing trouble, most likely. They have been getting bolder. That is terrible. Did you report it to the sheriff? Already sent word. Not that it will do much good. They are long gone by now, probably across the territorial border. He rubbed his eyes wearily. "Excuse my appearance. I have been up all night fighting the fire." "You should rest," Jane said. "Cannot. Still too much to do. Need to check the cattle, make sure none were injured by the smoke, assess the full damage to the fencing." "Then let me help," Jane offered. "I may not know much about ranching, but I can follow instructions." Nathan looked like he wanted to protest, then seemed to think better of it. "All right. But first, I need to clean up and eat something before I fall over." George, who had been standing quietly by the buggy, spoke up. "I will head back to town and let folks know you are all right. Jane, shall I send someone to fetch you later?" Jane looked at Nathan, who said, "I can bring her back myself this evening if that is acceptable." "Perfectly acceptable," Jane said. "Thank you, George." After George left, Jane followed Nathan into the house. In the light of day, she could see more details than she had that first frantic night. The main room was large, with a stone fireplace and comfortable if worn furniture. Everything was neat, ordered, the home of a man who took care of what he had. Nathan disappeared upstairs to wash while Jane, feeling presumptuous but determined to be useful, found bread, cheese, and cold chicken in the larder and put together a meal. When he came back down, wearing clean clothes and with the soot washed from his face, he looked surprised. "You did not have to do that. You need to eat. Sit." He obeyed, too tired to argue. Jane poured coffee and sat across from him, watching as he ate with the mechanical efficiency of someone running on empty. When he had finished, some of the lines of exhaustion around his eyes had eased slightly. "Thank you," he said, "for coming out here, for caring enough to worry." "Of course I worried. Nathan, last night before the news came, you said you needed to tell me something." "What was it?" He was quiet for a long moment, his fingers toying with his coffee cup. "I was going to tell you that I have not been able to stop thinking about you since the day you stumbled onto my ranch. That I have not felt this way about anyone before, and it scares me because I barely know you, but somehow you feel essential already." Jane's heart hammered against her ribs. "I feel the same way. I kept telling myself I was being foolish, that it was too soon, that I came here to build a life for myself, not to fall for someone. But I could not help it." Nathan reached across the table and took her hand. His palm was rough with calluses, warm and solid. "I have nothing fancy to offer. This ranch is my whole life. The work is hard and never ends. Most days I am covered in dust and sweat. But if you could see yourself here, if you think you could be happy in this life, I would very much like to court you properly." "Yes," Jane said without hesitation. "Yes, I would like that very much." The smile that spread across Nathan's face transformed it, chasing away the weariness and worry. He stood, pulling her to her feet, and for a moment she thought he might kiss her. But instead, he simply pulled her into his arms, holding her close. Jane rested her head against his chest, hearing the steady beat of his heart, and felt something settle into place inside her. This was right. This was where she was meant to be. They stood like that for a long moment before Nathan finally released her with visible reluctance. "I really do need to check on the cattle. Come with me." They spent the afternoon riding the boundaries of the ranch on horseback. Nathan loaned Jane one of his gentler mares and showed remarkable patience as she relearned riding skills that had grown rusty from disuse. He pointed out the damage from the fire, explained his plans for recovery, and answered her questions about ranch life. Jane was struck by how much there was to know, how many details required constant attention. It was not just feeding and watering cattle. There were fences to maintain, predators to guard against, water sources to protect, seasonal patterns to track. Nathan spoke about it all with quiet expertise, and she found herself fascinated. As the sun began to lower, they returned to the ranch house. Nathan's hired hand, a laconic older man named Joe, had returned and reported that the cattle were all accounted for and unharmed. Nathan introduced him to Jane, and Joe tipped his hat politely before heading to the bunkhouse. "I should get you back to town," Nathan said reluctantly. "It is a long drive, and you have school tomorrow." The ride back to Superior passed too quickly, both of them reluctant for the day to end. Nathan drove the wagon right to Jane's door, helping her down with gentle hands. "When can I see you again?" she asked. "I need to stay at the ranch for the next week or so, get everything sorted from the fire. But after that, may I come to dinner? Perhaps meet your aunt properly." "She would like that. I would like that." Jane hesitated, then rose on her toes and pressed a quick kiss to his cheek. "Thank you for today, for letting me help, for being honest about your feelings." Nathan touched the spot where she had kissed him, his eyes warm. "Thank you for coming to check on me, for caring." He left reluctantly, and Jane watched until his wagon disappeared into the gathering dusk. She went inside with a lightness in her step that had been absent since before her parents died. The next week crawled by. Jane taught her lessons and attended to her duties, but her thoughts kept drifting to Nathan. In the evenings, she found herself planning what to cook for their dinner, imagining what she would wear, rehearsing what she might say. Aunt Margaret noticed her distraction immediately when Jane went to visit her small house on the edge of town. Margaret taught music lessons from her home and lived simply but comfortably. "You are glowing," Margaret observed over tea. "I take it things went well when you visited the Crawford ranch." Jane felt her cheeks warm. "Nathan has asked to court me. He is coming to dinner next Saturday." "Jane, that is wonderful. I always thought you two would suit each other well." Margaret smiled knowingly. "From the moment Martha told me Nathan found you, I suspected fate had a hand in your wrong turn." "Do you really believe that? That it was fate?" "I believe that sometimes the universe conspires to put us exactly where we need to be, even if it is not where we plan to go." "You were meant to end up at that ranch, meant to meet Nathan Crawford. Everything else was just the method of delivery." Jane wanted to believe that. It made the painful detour that had brought her to Arizona feel purposeful rather than random. Saturday finally arrived. Jane spent the afternoon preparing a meal that she hoped would impress, though her cooking skills were adequate rather than exceptional. She made chicken with herb gravy, mashed potatoes, green beans, and an apple pie using fruit she had bought from a woman who had a small orchard outside town. Nathan arrived precisely at 6 o'clock, wearing clean clothes and carrying wildflowers he must have picked on the way to town. Jane invited him in, charmed by the gesture and the slight awkwardness in his manner. "These are lovely, thank you. Seemed like I should bring something. My mother always said a gentleman never arrives empty-handed." Aunt Margaret joined them shortly after, and Jane was pleased to see how well she and Nathan got along. Margaret had a gift for drawing people out, and soon Nathan was telling stories about growing up on the ranch, about his parents and grandparents, about the history of the land. The meal passed pleasantly, and if the food was not perfect, no one seemed to mind. After they had eaten, Margaret excused herself tactfully, claiming she had preparations for tomorrow's music lessons. "Your aunt is a remarkable woman," Nathan said after she left. "I can see the family resemblance. She has been so kind, offering me this opportunity. I do not know what I would have done without her." "Maybe you would have ended up at my ranch anyway," Nathan suggested with a smile. "Fate seems determined to bring you into my life." "You believe in fate?" "I never used to. But meeting you, having you appear at my door exactly when I had been thinking I was tired of being alone, it makes me wonder." He reached across the small table and took her hand. "Jane, I know this is moving quickly. We have only known each other a few weeks. But I have never been more certain of anything." "I am certain too," Jane said. It does not make logical sense, but my heart knows what it knows. They talked late into the evening, discovering more about each other's hopes and dreams. Nathan spoke of his desire to expand the ranch, maybe diversify beyond just cattle. Jane shared her love of teaching, her dream of eventually starting a small library for the community. When Nathan finally left, it was close to midnight. He paused in the doorway, his hand cupping Jane's cheek gently. "I will be back next Saturday, and the Saturday after that, as many Saturdays as you will give me." "All of them," Jane whispered. "I want to give you all of them." This time he did kiss her. It was soft, sweet, full of promise. When he pulled away, both of them were breathless. "Good night, Jane." "Good night, Nathan." The pattern continued through the summer. Every Saturday, Nathan would come to town and they would spend precious hours together. Sometimes they had dinner with Aunt Margaret. Sometimes they walked through town. And sometimes they simply sat on Jane's small porch and talked. Nathan also began attending church regularly, sitting in the pew beside Jane and her aunt. The town quickly accepted them as a couple, and Jane grew accustomed to the knowing smiles and approving nods from her neighbors. In August, Nathan invited Jane to spend a full day at the ranch. She accepted eagerly, curious to see more of his life. He picked her up early Saturday morning, before the heat became oppressive. The ranch looked different in full summer, the landscape more brown than green, but the cattle were thriving. Nathan showed her everything, from the vegetable garden he maintained behind the house to the barn where he kept his horses. He introduced her to each animal by name, clearly fond of his livestock in a way that touched her. They ate lunch under the shade of a large cottonwood tree near the creek that ran through his property. Jane had packed sandwiches and lemonade, and they sat on a blanket Nathan had brought from the house. "I could get used to this," Nathan said, leaning back against the tree trunk. "Having you here, sharing meals, not eating alone at that empty table every night. Is that your way of saying you want more than Saturday visits?" Jane asked, her heart racing. "It is my way of saying I want every day. I want to wake up and see you across the breakfast table. I want to come in from working and find you here. I want to build a life with you, Jane." He turned to face her fully. "I love you. I know it is fast. I know we should probably wait longer, but I cannot keep it inside anymore. I love you and I want to marry you." Jane felt tears prick her eyes. "I love you too. Yes, Nathan. Yes, I want to marry you." He kissed her then, deeper than before, with passion and promise. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, he rested his forehead against hers. "I will buy you a ring when I go to town next week. Something worthy of you, though nothing could really be worthy. I do not need anything fancy, just you. Just this." They spent the rest of the afternoon making plans. They decided to marry in October, after the worst of the summer heat had passed, but before winter made travel difficult. It would give Jane time to finish her first term of teaching and make arrangements for a replacement or temporary leave. When Nathan took her back to town that evening, Jane's mind was spinning. She was engaged. She was going to be married, going to be a rancher's wife. It was nothing like the life she had imagined for herself, but it felt more right than anything ever had. Aunt Margaret cried happy tears when Jane told her the news. "I am so glad you found each other. Nathan is a good man and he will take care of you." "I know he will." "But Margaret, what about the teaching? The town hired me and I do not want to let them down. We will figure something out. Perhaps you can continue teaching until they find a permanent replacement. Or maybe you could teach part-time, close enough to the ranch that you could ride in a few days a week. The important thing is that you are happy." Over the next few weeks, Jane worked with the town council to develop a plan. She would continue teaching through the end of the school year in May, giving them plenty of time to find and hire a new teacher. After she and Nathan married in October, she would move to the ranch, but continue making the trip to town 3 days a week for school. It was not a perfect solution, but it allowed her to honor her commitment to the community while also beginning her new life with Nathan. The town council, seeing how beloved she had become to both students and parents, agreed readily. September flew by in a flurry of preparations. Jane worked with the local seamstress to alter one of her mother's dresses for the wedding, a beautiful cream-colored silk with delicate lace trim. Aunt Margaret volunteered to host the reception at her home, which had more space than Jane's tiny house. Nathan came to town every Saturday as usual, and they spent their time making practical plans. Jane would bring her few possessions to the ranch. They discussed which of Nathan's rooms she would make her own space, what furniture might need to be added, how they would share the work of running both the ranch and maintaining her teaching schedule. Through it all, Jane felt a deep contentment. This was so different from her brief engagement to Robert, which had been all about social expectations and family approval. What she had with Nathan was built on genuine affection, mutual respect, and shared values. The night before the wedding, Jane could barely sleep. She lay in her narrow bed, thinking about how this was the last night she would spend here, the last night of her old life. Tomorrow she would become Mrs. Nathan Crawford and everything would change. But instead of fear, she felt only excitement. The wedding day dawned clear and beautiful, the October sky a brilliant blue. Aunt Margaret helped Jane dress, fastening the tiny buttons down the back of the silk dress and arranging her honey-blonde hair with flowers Nathan had sent over that morning. "You look beautiful," Margaret said, her eyes bright with tears. "Your mother would be so proud." The ceremony was held at the small church, packed with townspeople who had come to witness the union. Jane walked down the aisle on her aunt's arm, her eyes finding Nathan immediately. He stood at the altar wearing a new suit that emphasized his lean, strong build. But it was the expression on his face that took her breath away, a combination of awe, love, and complete certainty. His hazel-green eyes never left hers as she moved toward him. The Reverend spoke words about love and commitment, about the sanctity of marriage and the importance of partnership. Jane barely heard any of it, focused entirely on Nathan's hands holding hers, on the promises they were making to each other. "I do," she said clearly when asked if she would take this man as her husband. "I do," Nathan responded, his voice steady and sure. "Then by the power vested in me, I now pronounce you husband and wife. You may kiss your bride." Nathan cupped Jane's face gently, his thumbs brushing her cheeks, and kissed her with a tenderness that brought tears to her eyes. The congregation erupted in applause as they turned to face their community as a married couple. The reception at Aunt Margaret's house was joyful, full of music and laughter and good wishes. Jane danced with Nathan, with George Patterson, with several of her students' fathers. She ate food she did not taste and accepted congratulations from what felt like the entire town. But finally, as the sun began to set, Nathan whispered in her ear, "Can we go home now? Home." The words sent a thrill through her. "Yes, let us go home." They said their goodbyes and climbed onto Nathan's wagon, which someone had decorated with tin cans and ribbons. Jane laughed at the noise as they drove away, waving to the well-wishers who lined the street. The drive to the ranch was quiet, both of them content to simply be together. Jane leaned against Nathan's shoulder, watching the familiar landscape pass by in the fading light. This was her home now, this wild country that had seemed so alien just a few months ago. When they reached the ranch, Nathan helped her down from the wagon, then, to her surprise, swept her up in his arms. "Tradition," he explained, carrying her across the threshold of the house. "For luck." He set her down gently in the main room, and Jane looked around with new eyes. This was her home now. Her kitchen, her furniture, her life to build. "You want something to eat, drink?" Nathan asked, suddenly seeming uncertain. Jane realized he was nervous, and the discovery was endearing. She took his hand, lacing their fingers together. "I just want to be with you." The nervousness in his eyes gave way to warmth. He led her upstairs to the room that was now theirs, where he had clearly made an effort. The bed was made with fresh linens, wildflowers sat in a vase on the dresser, and candles provided soft light. "Nathan," Jane breathed, touched by the thoughtfulness. "I wanted it to be special, wanted you to feel welcome." "I do, more than welcome. I feel like I am finally where I belong." He kissed her then, differently than before. There was still tenderness, but also passion, the promise of the life they would build together. Jane responded with her whole heart, no longer afraid, no longer holding anything back. The next morning, Jane woke to sunlight streaming through the window and Nathan's arm draped across her waist. She turned carefully, not wanting to wake him, and studied his face in the morning light. Even in sleep, he looked peaceful, content, so different from the lonely rancher she had first met. As if sensing her gaze, his eyes opened. When he saw her watching him, he smiled. "Good morning, Mrs. Crawford." "Good morning, Mr. Crawford." Jane tested the name, liking how it felt. "I could get used to waking up like this. You better. You are stuck with me now." He pulled her closer, kissing her forehead. "How do you feel?" "Happy. Complete. Like I have finally found what I did not even know I was searching for." They lay together a while longer before the demands of ranch life pulled them from bed. Nathan showed Jane the morning routine, teaching her how to feed the chickens he kept for eggs, how to milk the cow, how to check the water troughs. It was all new to her, but she absorbed the information eagerly, determined to be a true partner in this life. Over breakfast, they talked about their plans for the day. Nathan needed to ride out and check the herd. Jane wanted to start organizing the house, making it feel like theirs rather than just his. "You can change whatever you want," Nathan said. "Move furniture, get rid of things, add whatever you need. I want you to feel like this is your home, not just a place you are staying." "It already feels like home," Jane assured him. "But I would like to add some curtains, maybe some color. Everything is very brown." Nathan laughed. "Cannot argue with that. Make a list of what you need, and we will order it from the catalog." They spent their first week as a married couple, settling into a routine. Jane woke early to help Nathan with morning chores before he rode out to tend the cattle. She spent her days organizing the house, practicing her cooking, and preparing lessons for her 3 teaching days in town. In the evenings, they ate dinner together and talked about their days, learning more about each other's rhythms and habits. On Wednesday, Jane made her first trip back to town to teach. Nathan drove her in the wagon, reluctant to let her travel alone even though the road was relatively safe. He promised to pick her up after school ended. Her students greeted her with excitement, eager to hear about the wedding and her new life at the ranch. Jane answered their questions patiently, then directed them back to their lessons. But she could see the difference in how they looked at her now. She was not just their teacher anymore. She was part of the community in a deeper way, tied to the land through her marriage to Nathan. Teaching 3 days a week proved more challenging than Jane had anticipated. The travel time was significant, and she found herself exhausted by the time Friday evening arrived. But she loved the work too much to consider giving it up entirely. Nathan never complained about the arrangement, though she knew it meant more work for him on the days she was gone. He hired Joe, his ranch hand, to come more regularly to help with the extra burden. October melted into November, and Jane discovered the quiet joys of ranch life. She learned to recognize individual cattle by their markings, to predict weather patterns by the behavior of the animals, to find beauty in the stark desert landscape. She also learned to handle a rifle after Nathan insisted she needed to know how to protect herself when he was out working. Their nights together were sweet, full of discovery and growing intimacy. Jane had never felt so cherished, so desired. Nathan treated her with a combination of passion and tenderness that made her feel precious beyond measure. In early December, Jane woke feeling nauseated. She managed to hide it from Nathan that first morning, but when it continued for several days, she could no longer keep it secret. "You are ill," Nathan said worriedly, watching her struggle to eat breakfast. "I am sending for the doctor." "No," Jane said quickly. "I do not think I am ill, Nathan. I think I might be with child." He stared at her, his expression stunned. "A baby." "I am not certain yet, but the signs are there. I have missed my monthly courses, and this nausea is exactly what my mother described from when she carried me." Slowly, a smile spread across Nathan's face. He crossed to her chair and knelt beside it, taking her hands. "A baby. We are going to have a baby." "Are you happy?" Jane asked, suddenly uncertain. "Happy, Jane, I am overjoyed." He kissed her hands, her wrists, her face. "You have given me so much already. A home, a partner, a reason to build something that will last, and now a child. I could not ask for more." The pregnancy progressed smoothly through the winter months. Jane continued teaching until February, when the school board gently suggested she take leave for the remainder of the term. They had found a temporary teacher to replace her, a stern older woman named Mrs. Henshaw, who came highly recommended. Jane was relieved to stop the exhausting travel. As her body changed and grew, she found herself grateful to be at the ranch, able to rest when needed and focus on preparing for the baby. Nathan became even more protective, insisting she avoid any heavy work. He converted the spare bedroom into a nursery, building a beautiful cradle from cottonwood he had been saving. Aunt Margaret visited regularly, bringing supplies and advice. In late April, as spring transformed the desert with unexpected wildflowers, Jane went into labor. Nathan rode frantically to town to fetch the midwife, a capable woman named Helen Santos, who had delivered most of the babies in Superior. The labor was long and difficult. Jane endured it with gritted teeth and determination, Nathan holding her hand through every contraction. When their son finally arrived just after dawn, his first cries were the most beautiful sound Jane had ever heard. "A boy," Helen announced, placing the squalling infant on Jane's chest. "A healthy, strong boy." Nathan looked down at his son with wonder. "He is perfect," he breathed. "Jane, you are amazing." They named him James, after Jane's father, with Crawford as his surname carrying on Nathan's family legacy. James had his father's dark hair and his mother's blue eyes, and from the moment he entered the world, he owned both their hearts completely. The first few months were exhausting. James was a demanding baby, waking frequently to nurse and fussing unless he was held. Jane and Nathan took turns walking the floor with him at night, both of them operating on minimal sleep. But even in the exhaustion, Jane felt a completeness she had never known. Watching Nathan cradle their son, singing off-key lullabies in his deep voice, filled her with such love she sometimes felt her heart might burst. As James grew, his personality emerged. He was curious and determined, traits he clearly inherited from both parents. By his first birthday, he was walking and getting into everything, keeping Jane constantly on her toes. The ranch prospered too. Nathan's hard work paid off with a thriving herd and growing reputation for quality cattle. He hired 2 more permanent hands, allowing him to spend more time with his family. Jane did not return to teaching after James was born. She found new purpose in raising her son and managing the household, though she missed her students. To address that longing, she started a small Sunday school program at the church, teaching children to read using Bible stories. When James was 2, Jane discovered she was pregnant again. This time, she recognized the signs immediately and felt more confident about what lay ahead. Their daughter arrived in November, a beautiful baby with her mother's honey blonde hair and her father's hazel green eyes. They named her Margaret, for Jane's aunt, who wept with joy at the honor. Margaret was an easier baby than James had been, content to sleep and observe the world with solemn eyes. James adored his little sister, always wanting to help care for her, bringing her toys and patting her head gently. Life settled into a comfortable rhythm. Nathan worked the ranch with his hired hands, slowly expanding his holdings by purchasing adjacent land when it became available. Jane managed the household, raised their children, and found deep satisfaction in the life they had built together. 5 years after Jane had arrived at the wrong ranch, she stood on the porch one evening, watching the sun set in brilliant streaks of orange and pink. Nathan came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist and resting his chin on her shoulder. "What are you thinking about?" he asked. "How different my life is from what I planned. How I thought I was headed one place and ended up somewhere completely different. Any regrets?" Jane turned in his arms to face him. "Not a single one. That wrong turn was the best thing that ever happened to me." "To both of us," Nathan corrected. "I was just existing before you arrived, lonely without even realizing how lonely I was. You brought me back to life." "You saved me too," Jane said softly. "From a future of just going through the motions, you gave me purpose, family, love, everything that matters." Inside, they could hear James and Margaret playing, their childish laughter ringing through the house. Their life was not without challenges. The ranch demanded constant work, money was sometimes tight, and the isolation could be difficult. But they faced everything together, partners in the truest sense. Another 5 years passed. James, now 12, was already helping significantly with ranch work, showing his father's natural aptitude for animal husbandry. Margaret, at 7, was bright and curious, constantly asking questions and reading every book Jane could get her hands on. Jane had returned to teaching part-time when Margaret started school, taking over a small classroom in town 2 days a week. It was the perfect balance, allowing her to pursue her passion while still being present for her family. Nathan's ranch had become one of the most successful in the region. He had diversified as he had always dreamed, adding sheep to the cattle operation and even starting a small horse breeding program. His reputation for honest dealing and quality livestock meant he never lacked for buyers. On their 15th wedding anniversary, Nathan surprised Jane with a trip to Tucson. It was the first time they had been away from the ranch together since their honeymoon, leaving the children in Aunt Margaret's capable care. They stayed in a real hotel, ate at restaurants, and walked through streets filled with people and possibilities. But after 2 days, both of them were eager to return home. "I miss them," Jane admitted on the train ride back. "Is that silly? We have only been gone 2 days." "Not silly at all. I miss them too, and the ranch. I kept thinking about what needed to be done, whether Joe was remembering to check the south fence line." Nathan smiled ruefully. "We have become domestic, my love, and I would not have it any other way." When they arrived home, the children ran to greet them, talking over each other in their excitement to share everything that had happened. Jane scooped Margaret into her arms while Nathan lifted James, despite the boy's protests that he was too old to be carried. That evening, after the children were asleep, Jane and Nathan sat on their porch as they had countless times before. The stars were brilliant overhead, the air cool and crisp with the promise of autumn. "You remember what I said the day we met?" Nathan asked suddenly. "After you told me you were looking for the Patterson Ranch. You said this was the Crawford Ranch, and I had clearly arrived at the wrong place." "I was wrong about that. You arrived at exactly the right place. Maybe fate brought you to me, just like I said that first morning. Or maybe it was pure chance. Either way, I am grateful every single day that you made that wrong turn." Jane leaned her head on his shoulder. "So am I. This life we have built, this family, this home, it is everything I never knew I needed." Years continued to pass with the steady rhythm of ranch life. James grew into a young man, tall and strong like his father, eventually taking over more and more of the daily operations. Margaret surprised everyone by deciding to become a teacher herself, attending normal school in Prescott, and then returning to Superior to teach at the very school where her mother had started. Jane and Nathan grew older together, their hair graying, their bodies wearing the marks of decades of hard work. But their love remained constant, deepening with each passing year. They became grandparents when James married a kind young woman named Sarah and started his own family. And then again when Margaret eventually married a fellow teacher and had children of her own. The ranch house, which had seemed too big when Jane first arrived, filled with noise and laughter during family gatherings. Jane would look around at her children and grandchildren and feel overwhelmed with gratitude. One evening, when Jane was 65 and Nathan 69, they sat together on their porch as the sun set. Nathan's health had been declining, his heart not as strong as it once was, but he stubbornly refused to slow down. "Tell me again about the day we met," he asked, as he had countless times over the years. It had become a beloved story, one they never tired of repeating. "I arrived at the wrong ranch," Jane began, smiling. "Exhausted, lost, probably near collapse from heat and worry. And there you were, this tall stranger with the most unusual hazel-green eyes I had ever seen. And I took one look at you and my first thought was that you were too beautiful to be real," Nathan added, "standing in my yard like a mirage. You said maybe fate brought me to you, and I was right." Nathan reached for her hand, his grip still strong despite his age. "Best words I ever spoke." "You were my fate, Jane Crawford, my destiny. Everything good in my life started the moment you walked onto this ranch." "I love you," Jane said, squeezing his hand. "Then, now, and always. And I love you, more than words could ever express." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the Arizona sky paint itself in brilliant colors. This land that had once seemed so harsh and alien had become home. The ranch that Jane had stumbled upon by mistake had become the foundation of a life richer than anything she could have imagined. Her wrong turn had been so perfectly right. Nathan passed peacefully in his sleep 2 years later, his heart finally giving out after so many years of hard work. Jane grieved deeply, but found comfort in their children, their grandchildren, and the legacy they had built together. She lived another 8 years, remaining on the ranch that had been her home for nearly half a century. James and his family moved into the main house to care for her, and she spent her final years surrounded by love. On her last day, Jane sat on the porch where she and Nathan had spent so many evenings. Her granddaughter Margaret, named for both great-grandmother and grandmother, sat beside her. "Tell me about Grandpa," young Margaret asked. "How you met?" Jane smiled, her voice soft but steady. "I arrived at the wrong ranch by mistake, and your grandfather said maybe fate brought me to him." "Was he right?" "Oh yes," Jane said, her eyes distant with memory. "He was absolutely right. Sometimes the wrong turn leads you exactly where you are meant to be. Sometimes getting lost is the only way to find yourself." That night, Jane passed peacefully, slipping away in the house she had made a home, on the land she had come to love, surrounded by the family she and Nathan had created from that one fortunate mistake. In the years that followed, the Crawford Ranch continued to thrive, passed down through generations. And always, the story was told of how it all began with a wrong turn, a dusty stranger and a cowboy who believed in fate. It became family legend, a reminder that sometimes the best things in life come from the most unexpected places, and that love can bloom even in the harshest desert if given the chance to take root. The ranch house still stood decades later, weathered but strong, a testament to the love that had built it into a true home. And on quiet evenings, when the wind blew just right across the Arizona desert, some swore they could hear echoes of laughter, of two voices talking softly on the porch, of a love story that began with a simple wrong turn and lasted far beyond a single lifetime.